Relegation. That dreaded word, the sharp drop from England's top table to the unforgiving grind of the Championship. It's the death knell of a long campaign. The dreams fade, the lights dim, the cameras turn away. But sometimes, amidst the heartbreak and broken tactics, a few rise above it all. Every season there's that one player, that one talent who shines brighter than the rest, dragging a deadweight team on their back, refusing to go quietly, playing like they don't belong anywhere near the drop. From 2010 to 2025, we've seen future Champions League winners, World Cup stars and multi-million-pound transfers all suffer the fall. But they didn't crumble, they stood out. Some stayed, most left, but all of them made us look twice. This is their story. The best player from every Premier League side that got relegated, explained. Let's rewind the tape. When Blackpool danced into the Premier League, nobody expected much, but in the middle of the chaos stood one man with a wand of a left foot, Charlie Adam. Captain, heartbeat, talisman. He played like he didn't get the memo that Blackpool were supposed to go straight back down, dictating tempo from deep, pinging 60-yard balls like it was five-a-side. He was the unlikely orchestrator of Ian Holloway's fearless football. 12 goals, 8 assists, a left foot that bent games to his will, and when he scored that bullet free kick at Old Trafford, even United fans took notice. Blackpool went down swinging, but Adam's stock only rose. Liverpool came calling, so did the Scotland national team. He didn't just survive the Premier League, he owned his stage, even as it collapsed beneath him. Charlie Adam wasn't just Blackpool's best player, he was the soul of their one unforgettable season in the spotlight. In a season of sinking ships, Ben Foster was a man bailing water with his bare hands. Birmingham City's 2010-11 campaign will always be remembered for that shock League Cup win over Arsenal. And at the heart of it was Foster putting on a masterclass at Wembley. He didn't just make saves, he made statements. Reflex stops, one-on-ones, command of his box. The finals man of the match, and deservedly so. But that cup glory masked what was happening week in, week out. A team crumbling in the league while Foster did everything humanly possible to hold it together. He faced the most shots in the division and still finished near the top in saves made. His positioning, reactions and sheer bravery kept Birmingham alive far longer than they deserved. Relegation came, but nobody blamed the man in gloves. Foster didn't just keep Birmingham competitive, he kept them believing. In a season of heartbreak, he was their spine, their shield, their standout star. Scott Parker didn't just play for West Ham in 2010-11, he fought for them. Week in, week out, he bled claret and blue on a sinking ship. In a team full of inconsistency, Parker was pure heart and grit. He carried the midfield like a veteran general, crunching tackles, biting into duels, dragging them forward when others stood still. The man gave impassioned half-time speeches when the manager couldn't. He played with broken ribs, he scored crucial goals, and he led like few ever have in a relegated side. Pundits praised him, players respected him, the fans adored him, and when the hammers finally went down, it was Parker who left with his head held highest. Voted the FWA Footballer of the Year, yes, the best player in the entire Premier League despite being relegated. That says everything. Scott Parker wasn't just West Ham's best player, he was a Premier League warrior trapped in a team that didn't deserve him. Amid the chaos of Bolton's collapse, Adam Bogdan emerged as an unlikely standout, a raw, flame-haired shot-stopper thrown into the deep end and asked to swim. With veteran Jussi Jääskeläinen injured and the defence leaking like a sieve, Bogdan was tested early and often, and yet time and again he answered. He pulled off stunning saves at Old Trafford. He denied Chelsea at Stamford Bridge, and on too many days he kept the scoreline from turning ugly. Yes, he was still raw. Yes, there were mistakes, but he showed bravery, reflexes, and a willingness to fight in a team going under. Bolton finished 18th, undone by injuries and inconsistency, but Bogdan's performances earned him the club's Player of the Year award. He was young, he was overwhelmed, but he never looked away from the challenge. In a season where so many sank without trace, Bogdan stood tall between the posts.
Relegation?
Yeah, maybe for Blackburn, but Yakubu wasn't trying to hear it.
The Nigerian striker arrived like a man on a personal mission, to score goals no matter the chaos around him. And he did, 17 times, in a team that finished 19th. Let that sink in. He bullied defenders, scored from tight angles, poached in the box, hit a brace against United, bagged 4 in one game against Swansea. It didn't matter who he faced. Yakubu was locked in. While the club unravelled, boardroom drama, fan protests, Steve Keane chants, the Yak kept delivering, ruthless, cold-blooded, clinical. Blackburn went down, but Yakubu left with his reputation enhanced. One of the greatest goal-scoring seasons ever seen in a relegated side. He didn't run the most, he didn't press, but if the ball dropped in the box, it was curtains. In a Wolves side circling the drain, Stephen Fletcher was the one man who looked like he belonged at the level above. Physical, sharp, deadly in the air, Fletcher was a classic number 9 in an increasingly desperate team. And somehow, while Wolves unravelled week by week, he kept finding the net. 12 Premier League goals, that's more than any Chelsea player that season. He scored against United, he scored against Arsenal, he scored crucial headers when Wolves had no right to compete. His hold-up play was intelligent, his movement underrated, and his finishing clinical. Around him, it was chaos. Mick McCarthy sacked, Terry Connor thrown into the fire, the club collapsing from within. But Fletcher, he just kept going. Wolves finished bottom, but the striker walked away with suitors lining up. Sunderland paid big money to take him, because even in a doomed squad, Fletcher looked like a Premier League striker in exile, surrounded by ghosts, carrying the weight.
Sean Maloney, small in stature, but in Wigan's most unforgettable season, he played with giant influence. In a side built on daring, chaos, and Roberto Martinez's bold ideas, Maloney was the creative spark, the technician who made Wigan tick. He wasn't flashy for the sake of it, every touch had purpose. He threaded passes others wouldn't even see. He drifted wide, cut inside, floated between the lines, and when it mattered most, he delivered. That free kick against QPR, stunning. His cool assist in the FA Cup final, iconic. Wigan's shock win over Man City at Wembley made history and Maloney was front and centre. But league form was unforgiving. Despite his 6 assists and moments of magic, Wigan were relegated just days after lifting the cup. A beautiful, bizarre contradiction of a season. Maloney wasn't just Wigan's best player, he was the soul of their miracle run. A cup winner, a playmaker, a bright light in a fading campaign. QPR's 2012-13 season was a circus. Big names, bigger egos, no cohesion, a relegation waiting to happen. But despite it all, Clint Hill stood out. Not because he was flashy, not because he was technically gifted, but because he actually gave a damn. At 34, he didn't care for the drama or the dressing room politics. He just defended, threw his body in the way, fought for every inch. While others jogged, he sprinted. While others pointed fingers, he dug in. Hill was more than just QPR's captain. He was their glue. He didn't hide behind reputation. He showed up every week, leading by sheer willpower. They were overpaid, underperforming, and headed for the drop. But Hill, he was never part of the problem. He was voted Supporters Player of the Year. In a squad full of so-called stars, it was the old-school centre-back who earned the fans' respect. Because sometimes the best player isn't the most talented. Sometimes it's the one still fighting when everyone else gives up. Adam Le Fondre, the super sub, the late game specialist, the man who turned hope into havoc, even if just for a moment. Reading's return to the Premier League was brief, but Le Fondre made it unforgettable. He didn't start every game, but when he came on, he made noise. He had a nose for drama, last-minute equalisers, match-winning goals, and a habit of turning up when Reading were clinging to life. He scored 12 goals that season, most of them off the bench. Clutch finishes, ice-cold penalties, headers he had no right to win. The peak? January 2013. He won Premier League Player of the Month. As a sub, that's how deadly he was. Reading were leaky at the back, outclassed too often, but in Le Fondre, they had belief. A striker who needed half a chance to flip a game. They went down, but his impact? Lasting. Le Fondre didn't just score goals, he gave Reading fans a reason to believe. Robert Snodgrass. Gritty, clever, and always willing to shoulder the burden when others went quiet.
Norwich's 2013-14 campaign was a slow-motion collapse, a team that couldn't score enough and cracked under pressure. But Snodgrass, he was the one spark in the grey. 7 goals, a handful of assists, and a fight in his game that so many around him lacked. He could play wide, drift central, whipping crosses with venom, or drive into the box and make something out of nothing. While big money flops like Ricky van Wolfswinkel disappeared, Snodgrass showed heart. He chased every loose ball like it meant something. And it did, to him at least. Norwich went down without much of a fight, but Snodgrass walked away with his reputation enhanced. Hull came calling, and he stayed in the Premier League, because you couldn't look at that Norwich team and not see who stood out. He wasn't flashy, but he was reliable, consistent, proud. The kind of player fans remember, not for tricks, but for turning up. In a Fulham side that looked lost, broken even, Ashkan Dejagah was one of the few who seemed to be playing like the club still had something to fight for. He wasn't the headline act, but he carried danger, a winger who could glide past defenders, strike from range, and inject urgency into a side that so often looked lifeless. 6 goals in a side that barely functioned, and most of them memorable, hit with venom, confidence, even desperation. While veterans like Berbatov looked disinterested and managers came and went, Dejagah was relentless. He ran, he tackled, he shot, he fought. His goal against Newcastle was a stunner. His late season form gave a flicker of hope, but by then, it was already too late. Fulham went down after 13 years in the Premier League, and most of that squad faded into memory. But Dejagah stood out because he didn't shrink in the chaos. He played like a man trying to rewrite the ending, even when the story was already over. In a side leaking chances and drowning in pressure, Marshall was the last line, and somehow he made it look like Cardiff still had hope. Shot after shot, week after week, he stood tall. It wasn't just the volume, it was the quality. Point-blank reflex saves, acrobatic dives, one-on-one miracles. Without him, Cardiff wouldn't have gone down with a fight, they would have sunk by Christmas. He made more saves than anyone else in the league, and not just empty stats. These were game-saving, highlight reel moments. Performances that earned him praise from pundits and players alike. Cardiff were simply outmatched, but Marshall kept them alive longer than they deserved to be. He was calm in chaos, class in crisis. You can't talk about great goalkeeping in a relegation season without mentioning his name. Because that year, David Marshall wasn't just Cardiff's best player. He was one of the best keepers in the entire league. When QPR stumbled back into the Premier League in 2014, few gave them a chance. But in the middle of the mess, one man stood tall. Charlie Austin. Raw, relentless, and ruthless in front of goal. While QPR leaked goals and changed managers, Austin just kept scoring. 18 Premier League goals, dragging a toothless side to respectability week after week. He wasn't fast, he wasn't flashy, but he had that striker's instinct, the ability to find space in chaos and punish defenders who blinked. Hat-trick against West Brom, a stunner against Southampton, a poacher's finish one week, a rocket the next. He carried them, plain and simple. And yet QPR fell. They conceded far too often and offered too little behind him. But Austin? He walked away a proven Premier League striker, one of the very few who didn't sink with the ship, a one-man survival bid, and arguably the best individual season we've seen from a striker in a relegated team this decade. In a Hull City team that slowly ran out of steam, Ahmed El Mohammadi remained one of the few bright spots. A constant runner, a wide outlet, a tireless presence on the right flank. While the side around him faltered, El Mohammadi never stopped offering himself, bombing forward, whipping in crosses, tracking back, week in, week out. He played every single Premier League game that season, the only Hull player to do so. That says everything. Not the flashiest, not the most headline-grabbing, but essential, functional, dependable. He even chipped in with a couple of crucial assists, one of the few players still delivering when Hull's form fell apart. As injuries hit and confidence dropped, he stuck to his role with discipline,
rarely rattled, never hiding. Hull's fate was sealed by a lack of goals and a midfield that couldn't keep up. But El Mohammadi, he was Premier League standard, even as the club dropped into the Championship. A hard-working, underappreciated soldier in a squad that simply couldn't survive the war.
In a Burnley side fighting uphill from day one, Danny Ings was the glimmer of real quality, a striker with poise, precision and Premier League potential written all over him. 11 goals in a side that scored just 28. That stat alone tells the story. He wasn't just scoring, he was dragging Burnley forward on his back. Clever movement, intelligent hold-up play and a calmness in front of goal that felt years beyond his age. When others panicked, Ings stayed composed. Whether it was a deft finish at Anfield or a scrappy goal in a relegation six-pointer, he made the difference, even when it wasn't enough. Burnley were organised, disciplined and committed, but toothless without him. And as the club dropped down, he rose up, earning a move to Liverpool that summer and proving his class belonged at a higher level. In a season full of struggle, Danny Ings was the silver lining, the striker who made Burnley believe, even if only for a little while. Signed from Lorient in the summer, many doubted him. Another flashy name, another gamble. But Ayew fought, he ran, he cared. 7 goals in a team that barely created chances, that might not sound like much. But when the rest of the squad looked lost, Ayew offered moments of defiance. A curling beauty against Newcastle, a thunderbolt at Watford. Even when the team was collapsing, he showed a striker's spark. He played like he had something to prove. Unlike others who drifted, he stood tall, demanding the ball, taking responsibility. His talent wasn't just potential, it was survival instinct. Of course, he couldn't save them. No one could. Villa were doomed from the top down, but Ayew's fight never faded. In a season of apathy and embarrassment, Jordan Ayew was the rare exception, a player who wore the shirt with purpose. Signed from PSV, with the captain's armband still fresh on his sleeve, Georginio Wijnaldum arrived at Newcastle as a marquee man, and for long stretches he played like one. 11 Premier League goals from midfield, a 4-goal masterclass against Norwich, a rocket against Liverpool. He lit up St James's Park, especially at home where he looked every inch a top-level player. His movement was intelligent, his finishing sharp, and when he clicked into gear he looked untouchable. In a chaotic, misfiring squad, he was one of the few with genuine Champions League pedigree. But there was frustration too. He disappeared in away games, caught in the inconsistency that plagued the entire squad. One week dazzling, the next invisible. Still, when Newcastle's fate was sealed, there was no doubt Wijnaldum was too good for the drop. He left for Liverpool that summer, and the rest is history. Titles, trophies, and world-class status. At Newcastle, he was a spark in the dark, brilliant in flashes, but ultimately stranded in a team that never found its rhythm. In a Norwich City squad caught in freefall, Johnny Howson was the heartbeat in midfield, a player who carried the hopes of a relegation-threatened team on his broad shoulders. Reliable, creative and fearless, Howson's vision and passing kept Norwich ticking, even as their form crumbled around him. He wasn't flashy, no dazzling tricks or screaming headlines, but every ball he played mattered. His composure in pressure moments gave Norwich a fighting chance. 4 goals and crucial assists came from him, yet it wasn't enough to stop the slide. When the team was at its lowest, Howson's work rate never faltered. He was the consistent, quiet leader in a season marked by despair. A midfielder who gave his all, but ultimately couldn't carry a sinking ship alone. In a season where Sunderland looked destined for the drop from the very first whistle, Jermaine Defoe stood apart, a clinical striker fighting a hopeless battle. 15 Premier League goals in a team that scored just 29. It was absurd, heroic, tragic. Every goal felt like defiance, a moment of world-class finishing in a squad crumbling around him. From instinctive tap-ins to curling screamers, Defoe reminded everyone that class is permanent, even when hope is gone. He wasn't just scoring, he was leading. At 34, he ran like a man 10 years younger, tireless, ruthless, committed. one of the only players who never accepted defeat. But he couldn't do it alone. Sunderland were broken, tactically, mentally, structurally. Defoe's brilliance was a lonely light in total darkness. He left that summer with his head held high, not as a relegated striker, but as a Premier League legend who refused to quit. Before the memes, before the Manchester United price tag, there was Harry Maguire at Hull, quietly announcing himself as one of the Premier League's most promising defenders. Hull were leaky, chaotic and constantly scrambling, but amidst it all, Maguire emerged with composure, strength and serious presence. He wasn't just a brute at the back, he was confident on the ball, willing to carry it out, make passes, even charge into midfield with purpose. He ended the season as captain, and not by accident. Defending last-ditch became routine, but Maguire handled it with maturity well beyond his years. While others around him wilted, he looked unbothered, a standout in a collapsing structure. It was clear he'd outgrown the side. Relegation wasn't his failure, it was the spotlight that earned him a move to Leicester, and eventually, the biggest stage of all. In a season of defensive chaos, Harry Maguire didn't just survive, he rose. At just 24, Ben Gibson led the Middlesbrough defence with the calm of a veteran, tackling smartly, positioning well, barking orders like the armband was stitched to his sleeve. Middlesbrough weren't easy on the eye, but they could be hard to break down, and that was largely thanks to Gibson. He played every single minute of the league season, a testament to his fitness, discipline and dependability. With chaos ahead of him and goals nowhere to be found, he held the backline together week after week. No drama, no flair, just honest, intelligent defending. His form didn't go unnoticed. There were England whispers and Premier League clubs started circling. For Borough, he was the last line of pride in a side sinking without ambition. A local lad who gave it everything, even when there was nothing left to play for. Among the wreckage of Stoke City's disastrous 2017-18 campaign, Xherdan Shaqiri was the lone spark flickering in the fog. He played like a man trapped in the wrong film. Champions League talent, championship-bound squad. 8 goals, 7 assists, and every one of them felt like he carved it out of stone. No service, no support, just bursts of brilliance from a player operating on a level the rest of the team couldn't touch. He scored curlers from nowhere, whipped in crosses begging for a striker who never arrived, and still tracked back like the team depended on him. Because they did. His post-relegation quotes caused a stir. Even Ronaldinho couldn't save this team, he said. Brutal? Maybe, but also honest. West Brom's fall in 2017-18 was slow, painful and predictable. A team that forgot how to attack and eventually forgot how to survive. But through it all, Ben Foster stood tall. At 34, he was the Baggies' final line of defence and most weeks, their only hope. Week after week, he pulled off save after save, trying to hold back the tide as the team in front of him cracked wide open. He bailed them out constantly. One-on-ones, fingertip stretches, near-post reflexes, and yet the pressure never eased. Foster didn't moan, didn't flinch, he just kept going. A professional to the last whistle. The leadership, the consistency, the calm, it was a level few around him could match. West Brom were relegated, but Foster walked away with his reputation stronger than ever, and rightly so. He wasn't just their best player, he was their backbone. In a season where the Welsh side crumbled from front to back, their goalkeeper stood as the one figure consistently delivering Premier League level quality. Shot after shot, game after game, Fabianski was under siege, but he never looked overwhelmed. His reflexes were sharp, his positioning was textbook, and his command of the box was calm under constant pressure. He made the most saves of any keeper in the league, not because he was reckless, but because Swansea simply bled chances. And still, week after week, he kept the scorelines respectable. No dramatics, no finger pointing, just elite goalkeeping behind a failing system. When Swansea were finally relegated, few blamed him. In fact, most admired him. He earned a Premier League lifeline with West Ham and proved he still belonged at the top level. Fabianski wasn't just Swansea's best player. He was their dignity, right until the lights went out.
The first ever Filipino to play in the Premier League, and by the end of the season, one of the few reasons Cardiff had any hope at all. In a team fighting uphill battles every single week, Etheridge was heroic. Penalty saves, acrobatic stops, commanding presence. He didn't just play well, he stood out. He saved 3 penalties by September and finished the campaign with the second most saves in the league. This wasn't just volume, it was quality. He kept Cardiff alive in matches they had no business surviving. The defence was often chaotic, the attack toothless, but between the posts, Etheridge delivered time and time again. Relegation was inevitable, but his performances were unforgettable. For a club that relied on spirit more than stardust, he embodied both. And for Cardiff fans, his gloves became a symbol of belief in an otherwise bleak campaign.
Fulham's return to the Premier League was supposed to be a statement. Instead, it was a cautionary tale. Poor recruitment, leaky defending, and 3 different managers. Chaos from top to bottom. But amidst the wreckage, Callum Chambers quietly stood out. Loaned in from Arsenal, many expected him to slot in at centre-back. Instead, he was shifted into midfield, and somehow that's where he shone. He brought calm to the storm. Composure on the ball, smart positioning, and a willingness to battle. It was a different side to Chambers, one few had really seen. In a team that conceded 81 goals, Chambers offered brief but consistent resistance. He even won Fulham's Player of the Season, a rare accolade in a sinking ship. He wasn't flashy, but he was functional, and for Fulham in 2018-19, that made him priceless. The club dropped, but Chambers rose, proving there's still more to him than squad depth and rotation minutes. For Huddersfield, the magic ran out. After a heroic survival in 2017-18, the Terriers tumbled hard the next season, finishing rock bottom with just 3 wins. But if there was one player who never dropped his standards, it was Christopher Schindler. The German defender, already a cult hero for slotting the promotion-winning penalty in 2017, remained the heart and soul of the side, even as everything around him unravelled. Week after week, he threw himself into blocks, tackles, and last-ditch clearances. He didn't sulk, he didn't hide, he led. As Huddersfield shipped goals and confidence, Schindler kept his dignity, and more importantly, his level. The club handed him the armband mid-season, and it wasn't just ceremonial, it was earned. He was their organiser, motivator, and best player in a team running on fumes. Relegation was brutal, but Schindler never let it define him. He stayed, he led, and he left with respect. Watford's 2019-20 campaign was a slow-motion collapse. Chaotic ownership, 3 different managers, and a squad that never quite clicked. But in the middle of that dysfunction, one man still played like a giant, Etienne Capoue. Cool-headed, press-resistant, and tactically intelligent, Capoue wasn't just a midfield anchor, he was Watford's pulse. He didn't rack up goals or flashy assists, but what he did was harder to measure. He controlled tempo, broke up play, and transitioned defence into attack with elegance. While others shrank under pressure, Capoue stayed calm. He was the kind of player you build around, not just plug in. Relegation wasn't on him. In fact, without him, it might have come even sooner. Capoue played like a Premier League player in a team that simply wasn't won anymore, and it's no coincidence that within months, Villarreal snapped him up, where he went on to lift the Europa League. From Watford's rubble, he walked out with credibility and silverware. For a brief, golden stretch in the autumn of 2019, Todd Cantwell looked like the next big thing. The floppy-haired local lad with flair in his feet and fearlessness in his play, Cantwell was Norwich's creative spark in a season doomed by defensive frailty. He played with personality, always on the half-turn, always scanning, always ready to glide past his man. And when Norwich shocked Manchester City at Carrow Road, it was Cantwell scoring the second, celebrating like he'd just won the league. He finished the season with 6 Premier League goals, second only to Pukki. But it wasn't just stats, it was the attitude. He played with edge, with defiance, even as Norwich's campaign unravelled into a one-way descent. While others looked lost, Cantwell looked like he belonged. And for a team that went down with a whimper, he went down swinging. Norwich were relegated, but Cantwell walked away with admirers, and for a while felt destined for bigger things. When Bournemouth's 5-year Premier League story finally ended, it wasn't because of their goalkeeper. In fact, Aaron Ramsdale might have been the only reason it lasted as long as it did. At just 21, thrown into the deep end after 2 seasons out on loan, Ramsdale became Eddie Howe's number 1. And despite the chaos in front of him, a crumbling defence, leaky midfield and a blunt attack, Ramsdale stood tall. He made more saves than any other keeper in the league that season, and many of them weren't routine. Reflex stops, fingertip pushes, one-on-one heroics. He kept Bournemouth in games they had no right to be in. His performances were defiant, brave, loud, sometimes wild, but always full of intent. He didn't play like a rookie, he played like a fighter. Bournemouth dropped, but Ramsdale's stock skyrocketed. Relegation made him a better keeper, forged in the fire, battle-tested early, and impossible to ignore. Arsenal eventually came calling, but it all started here in the ruins of Dean Court. Back-to-back relegations, 2 different clubs, and yet in both collapses, Aaron Ramsdale came out shining. When Sheffield United lost Dean Henderson and brought in Ramsdale, many questioned it. Was he ready? Was he good enough? But by season's end, he was the only blade left with his head held high. This wasn't the same Sheffield United from the year before. The magic was gone, the goals dried up, the confidence disintegrated, and yet Ramsdale kept standing tall, under siege almost every week. Shot stopping, sweeping, commanding his box, he faced more pressure than most keepers his age ever do, and still he refused to wilt. The team around him sank like a stone. Bottom of the table, barely a fight, but Ramsdale was the fight. 2 relegations in 2 seasons, and somehow his reputation only grew. In a side that looked out of its depth from the opening whistle, Matheus Pereira stood apart, a Rolls-Royce parked in a scrapyard. West Brom's 2020-21 season was defined by bluntness, chaos, and defensive disaster. But Pereira played like he hadn't read the script. Silky on the ball, sharp with his movement, and ruthless in front of goal, he was class personified in a team scraping for air. His 11 goals and 6 assists didn't just top West Brom's charts, they made up the heartbeat of an otherwise lifeless campaign. He scored screamers, created out of nothing, and always looked like he belonged at a far higher level. Whether it was a curling effort from distance or an inch-perfect delivery on the counter, Pereira was box office, even when the team around him was box ticking. West Brom finished 19th, predictably, but Pereira? He'd done his bit, and then some. A relegated player, yes, but one with top 6 quality oozing from every touch. On paper, Fulham were doomed. Promoted too soon, too soft in defence, too cautious in attack. But between the sticks stood a World Cup winner, and Alphonse Areola made sure they didn't go quietly. Loaned in from PSG, Areola brought class, composure, and world-class shot-stopping to a relegation scrap most goalkeepers would have avoided. He faced a barrage. Fulham were under pressure nearly every week, but Areola made save after save, kept games alive, and at times looked like he was holding back the tide with his bare hands. It wasn't just reflexes, it was presence, a calming authority in a side full of uncertainty. He earned Fulham's Player of the Season for a reason. They went down, but Areola's reputation didn't dip an inch. If anything, it rose. He didn't save Fulham from the drop, but he saved their dignity. Maxwell Cornet wasn't your typical Burnley signing. Flair, finesse, and a Champions League pedigree dropped into the mud and grit of Turf Moor. And yet, he fit. Not because he played like a Dyche player, but because he delivered when it mattered. In a side no more for stubborn defending than dazzling moments, Cornet was electric, a burst of unpredictability. His 9 Premier League goals weren't just top of Burnley's charts, they were lifelines, each one a flash of hope in a season that never quite sparked. He scored volleys, curlers, clever chips, the kind of goals Burnley hadn't seen in years. Cornet made fans believe, even when belief had no business being there. Relegation hit hard. the end of the Dyche era and the end of Burnley as we knew them. But Cornet walked away as the one bright flame in all the smoke. A winger with style, goals and heart in a team that so often lacked all three. Another season, another relegation. But once again, Teemu Pukki stood firm in the chaos. The face of Norwich's yo-yo existence, Pukki wasn't just their talisman, he was their entire front line. In a team starved of service, ideas and confidence, he still managed 11 Premier League goals, nearly half of Norwich's total that year. He chased hopeless balls, made clever runs and finished chances with the kind of calmness that belonged in the top half of the table. But no striker, no matter how sharp, can drag a team alone. Norwich were passive, porous and completely outclassed. Again. And yet, week in, week out, Pukki delivered. No complaints, no drama, just goals. By the end, it was clear. Norwich were a championship club with a Premier League striker. Teemu Pukki didn't go down in shame. He went down swinging. Norwich Pukki. January signings don't usually become fan favourites overnight, but then again, Hussein Kamara didn't play like a mid-season panic buy. He played like a man on a mission. Joining a sinking ship in the heart of winter, Kamara brought energy, aggression and a touch of chaos to Watford's flailing backline. He flew into tackles, covered every blade of grass on the left and gave a team with no identity something to rally behind. Defensively flawed? Yes, Watford were an open book and everyone knew the ending. But Kamara wasn't the problem. In fact, he was often the only one trying to write a different script. Voted Watford's player of the season after just 5 months, that says it all. Relegation came quickly, but Kamara left his mark. Tenacious, fearless and impossible to ignore, a rare fighter in a team that gave up far too soon. Amid Leicester's fall from grace, a collapse that felt both slow and sudden, Harvey Barnes was the last flicker of attacking fire. While others lost their edge, faded in confidence, or simply disappeared, Barnes kept driving forward. Relentless, direct, and unapologetically old school, he ran at defenders like it was 2019 again. 13 Premier League goals, not from the penalty spot, not padded by meaningless tap-ins, but crafted through pure determination and intelligent movement. In a side that forgot how to win, Barnes was one of the few who never forgot how to fight. He played like he believed survival was still possible, even when it clearly wasn't. And when the dust settled on Leicester's shocking relegation, it wasn't James Maddison or Yuri Tielemans who impressed most. It was Barnes, the quiet executor who left with his head held high. Not just Premier League quality, top 6 ready. And Newcastle agreed. At just 19, he stepped into the chaos of Southampton's midfield with the composure of a veteran. Press resistant, tactically sharp and blessed with that rare pause under pressure quality, Lavia looked like a player Southampton had no business possessing. He didn't just survive in the Premier League, he imposed himself. Whether shielding the backline, breaking the press or starting attacks, Lavia operated like a metronome in a team that rarely found rhythm. Southampton were disjointed, tactically messy and hopelessly inconsistent, but Lavia's performances felt like previews of something bigger, a player clearly destined for the top. By season's end, relegation felt like a formality, but Lavia, he walked out of St Mary's with his stock 10 times higher than when he arrived. 1 season, 1 relegation, and still the most valuable asset in the squad. For most of his Leeds career, Rodrigo felt like a misfit. A marquee signing that never quite settled, but in 2022-23, as everything fell apart around him, he finally looked like the player Leeds thought they were buying. While managers changed and systems crumbled, Rodrigo stayed consistent, clutch, clinical and surprisingly ruthless. He hit 13 Premier League goals, often dragging Leeds out of disaster zones with solo moments of brilliance. This wasn't the flashy Spain international of Valencia days, this was a hardened version, forged in a relegation fight, scoring goals when the team barely created chances. He was Leeds' go-to man, their only genuine threat at times, and he fought through injury just to be on the pitch. When others disappeared, he stood up. Relegation came anyway, but Rodrigo's legacy shifted. From expensive flop to respected leader, he left Elland Road with dignity, finally delivering when it mattered most.
When Ross Barkley signed for Luton Town, most thought it was a swan song, a former prodigy joining a newly promoted side. It reeked of fading lights and final chances. But what followed was something far more remarkable. Barkley didn't just revive his career, he reimagined it. He became the heartbeat of Luton's midfield, elegant yet gritty, creative yet responsible. For the first time in years, Barkley played with purpose, controlled, composed, commanding. Every game he played felt like a reminder of what he could have been and what he still might be. He dictated the tempo, carried the ball through pressure, and gave Luton a touch of class that most relegation-threatened teams could only dream of. While Luton inevitably went down, Barkley walked away as a player reborn, not just a standout, the standout, the one who gave Premier League defenders problems all season long. After years of questions and quiet exits, he left the Premier League stage in 2024 as one of the league's most talked about midfielders. Again.
Sander Berge was always built for more than Championship football, but the Premier League never quite saw the best of him. Until 2023-24, at Burnley under Company's brave if flawed system, Berge found his rhythm again. Tall, composed and deceptively elegant, he became the calming presence in a chaotic team. He broke lines, resisted pressure and carried the ball with the assurance of a man who had nothing to prove, and yet everything to reclaim. In a Burnley side that often looked out of its depth, Berge brought clarity. When the press hit hard, he glided past it. When the midfield crumbled, he held it together. He wasn't scoring screamers or racking up assists, but if you watch closely, he was Burnley's engine, their control, their grown-up in midfield. Burnley went down swinging, but Berge left the pitch every week with his head high. A quiet standout in a noisy, failing system, and one of the few to enhance his reputation through relegation.
Signed from Coventry with hopes of bringing Championship spark to the top flight, Hammer didn't just adapt, he stood out. Among the wreckage, he was a fire starter, trying to make things happen when nobody else dared. His vision, his tenacity, and that sweet right foot kept Sheffield United ticking, even as the walls fell around him. He scored, assisted, chased shadows, and still looked like he belonged in a better team. This wasn't survival football. This was a gifted midfielder playing a level above his surroundings. He couldn't save them, but he did give fans someone to believe in. When the final whistle blew on a historically bad campaign, Hammer left it all on the pitch. He played like a fighter and walked away like a future Premier League returnee. Jamie Vardy's final Premier League dance wasn't about pace. It wasn't even about goals. It was about presence, about legacy, about one man refusing to bow out quietly. In a Leicester side riddled with inconsistency, Vardy stood tall, not just as a striker, but as a symbol. The last remnant of their miracle era, now tasked with leading a team that had forgotten how to win ugly. His legs weren't what they used to be, but his instincts were. He still made defenders panic, still sniffed out space, still chased every lost cause like it was 2016 all over again. And when it mattered most, he delivered. Crucial goals, clutch moments, leadership when the dressing room needed it most. Leicester went down, but Vardy didn't fade. He fought, right until the end. It may have ended in relegation, but his story finishes as one of the Premier League's most iconic strikers, still dragging defenders and his club into battle one last time. Liam Delap arrived at Ipswich with a point to prove. Once tipped as Manchester City's next striking prodigy, he'd spent years bouncing between loan spells, but 2024-25 was different. This was his platform. In a spirited Ipswich side fighting uphill all season, Delap emerged as their sharpest blade, leading the line with grit, power and a hunger that never faded. He finished the campaign with 12 Premier League goals, a tally that spoke of promise delivered even amid the storm. His game was more than just numbers. He pressed like a man possessed, bullied centre-backs twice his age, and gave Ipswich a focal point they could believe in. It wasn't always pretty. The team around him struggled to adapt and relegation eventually came, but Delap stood out, not as a boy with potential anymore, but as a striker carving out his place in the top flight. Ipswich may have dropped, but Delap rose. In a Southampton midfield often short on control, Mateus Fernandes played with ice in his veins. Calm, composed and utterly unfazed by the chaos around him, he quickly became one of the few bright spots in a struggling side. Signed quietly, developed patiently, and then thrown into the Premier League fire, Fernandes didn't flinch. His passing range, his positional awareness, his ability to ride the press, it all felt beyond his years. He wasn't the loudest on the pitch, but you noticed him. In tight spaces, under pressure, he found solutions. A rare bit of silk in a season full of scrap. Southampton went down, again, but Fernandes elevated himself. He looked like a player destined for a higher stage, someone too technically refined to stay in the Championship for long. This season didn't make Matheus Fernandes, it revealed him.
And there it is, the best from the worst. These were the players who shone brightest when the lights were fading, who stood tall while their teams fell. From heartbreak to heroics, Relegation has always had a way of revealing the real ones. Agree? Disagree? Let me know who your picks are in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a drop of football nostalgia and analysis. Until next time, this has been the beauty of relegation.